Okay, welcome. Today we are here to talk about unique financial circumstances that you may encounter when working with families and students throughout the financial aid process. We have a great panel here today. I'm going to have them each introduce themselves. But my name is Stephanie Wells. I've been at MEFA for closing in on 22 years. So I've been working with families and students for a long time now, helping them through the entire college enrollment process. And right now, as Director of College Relations, I specifically work a lot with colleges on MEFA's loan programs and processing. And I've gathered a few of my friends from local colleges here in Massachusetts to talk about some of these unique circumstances that you'll find your students in and how it might differ from school to school. So we have 3 different schools here, public, private, and we're going to go through all of that. So before we jump into the presentation, I'll just go alphabetically here. I'll go with Suellen first. Suellen, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and just a little bit about Assumption.
Sure. My name again is Suellen Dean. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Financial Aid. I've been at Assumption University for 17 years. I did the first 8 years in the student services end, and then I've been in financial aid for 9 years. Assumption is in Worcester. It's a private Catholic liberal arts institution with an undergraduate population of around 2,000. And then we also have a large amount of graduate programs with about 1,500 graduate students.
Excellent, thank you. So Kevin, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Salem State.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Kevin DeRuosi. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Aid, and my focus is special programs and compliance at Salem State University. I've been at Salem State 17 years, was at Bunker Hill for 3 years, was at Emerson for 4 years, and prior to that, I was a high school guidance counselor, despite my youthful appearance. I've kind of been in many facets of education. Salem State is a medium-sized 4-year public institution. We have approximately about 4,000 undergrads and about 1,500 graduate and evening division students. And I'm happy to be here and share some information to hopefully make college affordable and help people navigate some of the special circumstances that they may be facing.
Thank you. And last but not least, Karensa, welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karensa. I go by Carrie, so anybody can address me, call me Carrie. DiFonzo, Student Financial Services at Wellesley College, where I'm the director. I've been in my role as director at Wellesley for 5 years and have been on the staff here for just over 15 years. Prior to joining the staff, I was a work-study student in student financial services at Wellesley College. So I'm the one they can't get rid of. A little bit about Wellesley. We are a small private liberal arts institution, historically women's college, about 12 miles west of Boston. We're located in the town of Wellesley. And in terms of our financial aid program, we offer need-based financial aid only. We don't offer any merit scholarships at our institution. And we also have loan commitments where we don't package subsidized or unsubsidized loans for students with certain family incomes. Our student population, we've got about 2,300 undergrads. We have no graduate programs. And yeah, I'm also excited to be here and realizing that all 3 of us have last names of D. So maybe Stephanie was just scrolling through the Rolodex and got to the letter D and found us all. But that's pretty unusual for the panels that I'm on.
Yep, it is. And that's why I had trouble trying to figure out, okay, alphabetically. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. So just a little bit about MEFA. MEFA is a nonprofit quasi-state authority. For those of you on the line, you've probably been to one of our webinars before, but we do everything from soup to nuts about helping families through the college financing process. We also, as part of our mission, provide professional development opportunities as part of our MEFA Institute for school counselors and college administrators and community-based organizations. So for school counselors today who are on the line, this webinar is going to be about an hour. We'll take questions and go a few minutes over if we need to. But this webinar is worth 1 PDP point. So I'm going to show you at the end of the webinars, counselors, resources on MEFA.org, how you can cash in your PDP points, and we'll go through a little bit of that as well. So here's some of the guidelines or main topic areas that we're going to go through today. We're going to spend a good amount of time on financial aid appeals and special circumstances that colleges look at and what their process is, because it's going to be different from student to student. Whether or not, some schools have more independent students than others, so it'll be different to hear from all of our individual schools, as well as undocumented students and how that would work on their campus, working with students who are undocumented, as well as non-traditional parent families. We're going to talk about at the end things that colleges typically don't consider during appeals, and we'll go through that. But most of it will be really working with each school and hearing from them about how they handle different scenarios so that you can better assist your students. Okay, so special circumstances and appeals. I mentioned that we're gonna, really go through this in fine detail. But before I hand it over to the panel, families should, and this is the advice I give all the time, should contact the financial aid office at the college or colleges that the student is applying to if they have any type of special circumstance, because each school, as we're going to hear, is going to manage it differently. So it's usually a case by case only. Decisions can, sometimes they may have appeal committees within a college, but at the end of the day, whatever the college decides on, if it's a professional judgment, it's going to be the final decision. And then we'll go through some of those unique circumstances and kind of dig into those a little bit. Okay, so first let's talk about appeal logistics. So before we even talk about the types of appeals and what schools consider, how does the process work? How do you get things started working with the financial aid office? So we have bullets on the slide, and you'll get copies of these slides, but I do want to just turn it over to our panel one by one. I'll just shout out your names just to talk about some of these bullets and how it works at your institution. So Suellen's picture is right underneath mine. So I'm going to go with Suellen first, if that's okay.
Sure. So at Assumption, we want students to wait till they get their full financial aid award letter before they submit any type of appeal or special circumstance. So what happens is students at Assumption University hear about their academic merit scholarship with their acceptance letter. And then students who have completed the FAFSA, we're a FAFSA only school, will get a follow-up full financial aid award letter. And that would include any need-based federal or state aid. So we're asking them to wait until they get that full financial aid award letter, because we consider a reevaluation of their aid, and we can't reevaluate it until they've actually been packaged. So we do tell them to wait, and we take appeals from accepted students, after May 1st, deposited students, and even our returning students. And we have for appeals, we do have a link that anyone who inquires about an appeal will get sent an online link where they can submit the appeal and any documentation. And that could include letters from competing institutions that are similarly priced. And they submit it all through this online link. And then we have an appeals committee made up of financial aid and admissions representatives, and they meet twice a week to go over the appeals.
Great, thank you. And then approximately how long after a student receives their admissions letter do they receive their financial aid offer? Just trying to understand timing.
Sure, it's on a rolling basis this year. So it's going out, we have the first set going out in November. So it's on a rolling basis.
So pretty soon after.
Pretty soon, yes. We tell them to submit the FAFSA before or around the same time they're submitting their Common App, so that when they get their decision from the institution, we can follow it up really quickly with an award letter.
Excellent, great. Thank you. Okay, Kevin, let's hear about how things are working over at Salem State.
So as far as timing, at this point in the year, because we haven't started awarding our incoming students, our new incoming students, we suggest that you file the appeal when you file the FAFSA. The reason we suggest that is so that when we do start awarding our incoming class, which is the first or second week of December, we're starting with a clean EFC. And this way the student and the parent knows exactly, based on their FAFSA, their accurate FAFSA, what aid we can offer them. Beyond, once we start awarding, it's pretty much, we get the FAFSA, the award goes out the next week. So it's whenever you get your award. But at this point in the year, if you wanted to appeal and your FAFSA is done, we really suggest, submit the appeal form, get it into us. There is an appeal form on our website, pretty basic information that we request. And students can also contact our Student Navigation Center, which is our one-stop, and they'll forward the appeal form along to them. Once the appeal form is completed, generally 3 to 5 business days will populate the students' to-do list on their Navigator, which is our student portal. If we're requesting, tax returns, W-2s, any sort of documentation that will show up on their to-do list. Typically, we say 4 to 6 weeks once all requested documentation is received. The reality is it's more 3 to 4 weeks maximum, but we like to build in that little buffer depending on the volume. And then once we get all the documentation, I actually have one of my staff people does all of the appeals that come in. She and I may work on 1 or 2 if they're a little hairy, but other than that, she makes the decisions and she'll do the repackaging of the award and send out a new award letter to the students.
Excellent, thank you. And Carrie.
Sure. So Wellesley College is not a FAFSA only school. We do require the CSS profile from students who are applying either for admission and financial aid, or are returning students who are reapplying for financial aid. The CSS profile does have a section specifically for special circumstances. So we encourage students and families who are filling out that form to list any special circumstances in that section and to provide us with as much information as possible. We also do require, base year tax documents. So tax returns for students and parents, W-2s, all pages, schedules, and statements, business tax returns, things like that. And students upload those to the College Board, which owns the CSS profile, also has a document imaging service that many institutions use, and it's called iDoc. And we encourage students to, expand on those special circumstances at the time that they are applying for financial aid. Give us as much information as possible. And what we do is we evaluate, when we're evaluating their financial aid application, we will evaluate any and all of those circumstances that they have put forward to determine if it makes any impact on either our institutional or on the federal family contribution that's being calculated. So we try to go out with our best offer up front, but recognize that and our students are notified of their financial aid decision at the time of admission. So then there's always a period of time between the notification of admission and a student having to reply to accept their spot in the class. And during that time, we do have students who will request that we reconsider their financial aid. Much like Kevin said, we have a form on our website. We call it a request for review form. They can download that, fill out the information, submit that. We may ask for additional documents. For us, once all of the documents are received, we typically say 7 to 10 business days for a response. We have a financial aid review committee that's made up of all of our financial aid counselors, so our assistant director level folks, but we also have multiple associate directors and myself, the director on that committee. We meet once a week. And during high appeal season, so usually during, for us, that's the month of April, we'll actually meet twice a week in April to try and get through those appeals and get the updated packages out the door as soon as we can.
Excellent, thank you. And for those who are just joining us, feel free to type in any questions. We are recording today's session and we'll send that link tomorrow. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about situations where there could be an increase or decrease in income, and how families, or especially how can school counselors help them. So do you want to know about increases mid-year, or should they just wait till the following year when they fill out their FAFSA? Decreases in income, I'm sure you hear a lot more about those because families want you to know they have less income so you can reconsider. But I will, Carrie, since we were just chatting with you, I'm going to start with you and have you get us started on this topic.
Sure. So in my 15 years, I don't think that I've ever received an email from a family telling me that they suddenly have an influx of income that they've never had before. We find that out when we get their financial aid application, and the year in which that income took place is what we're basing their financial aid off of. So we always tell families, if you have a one-time increase in income, some of the examples are listed here: an inheritance, a bonus that they've never received before, they had to take money out of their retirement for something. We always tell them to tell us about that. If your income in this particular year is not consistent with the income in other years, the year before and or the most recent year, let us know what the source of that was. And we, as a financial aid administrator, have the professional judgment ability to potentially look at that income a little differently if it is not consistently earned year over year. We do obviously hear a lot more about reductions in income. We've been dealing a lot, and I'm sure Kevin and Suellen have as well, with the continued impact of COVID on our families. And, there was a time where we were all kind of locked down at home and not everyone had the ability to work remotely. So we saw some reductions definitely from 2020, but even into 2021, we've continued to see those decreased earnings. Impacts from individuals in the family who have been impacted and affected by COVID themselves, and maybe it affected their ability to work because they're dealing with long-term COVID or something. So we always ask families, again, give us as much information as you can. We keep an eye on those applications when we're doing our review year over year, and we see a significant increase or a significant decrease. We always reach out to ask for information about that. And that's just part of our standard review for returning students.
Excellent. Great. Suellen, do you want to share some of these that you particularly hear a lot?
Sure.
Like
Carrie, we hear a lot more about the decreases in income, especially so, for example, this year's FAFSA for the students who will be starting in fall of 2023 is based on the 21 tax year. So oftentimes family household information, family finances have changed. So we hear a lot about that and collect documentation for special circumstance and professional judgment. As far as the increases in income, we do often see the FAFSA has this glitch where if a family hasn't removed like an IRA, like a rollover, that before the IRS data retrieval, it'll show up as untaxed income. So we get that a lot where they get a call from us. And typically what happens, we don't reach out to them, but their student might lose need-based aid. And that usually generates a phone call or an inquiry from them. And that's where we say, well, there's a large amount of increase of untaxed income. Was this potentially a rollover? And that's when they'll say, oh, yes, it is. I switched jobs and moved my retirement, and we'll collect documentation from them to remove that rollover and do a professional judgment.
Excellent. Thank you. And Kevin, I'll turn it over to you. I do want to just throw out just a quick little side note. When we had the Vax Millions, as you all may have heard about last year, the year before, and last year in Massachusetts, there is one student, I believe an 18-year-old, who won $1 million. And so one of our counselors is, they're still going to file their FAFSA. And we're going to work with them, just to make sure that they file it correctly and all that good stuff. And, they might not get much financially the first year, but it does happen. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm just going to echo what my colleague said. I mean, we very rarely, if ever, get the increase in income. We do find it because the EFC changes, and then after doing a little bit digging, after the parent or the student calls and says, well, we used to get this grant and how come we don't get it anymore? And then we discover, well, the biggest thing is the IRA rollover, because if they're using the data transfer, it is a glitch. It just comes in as income. It doesn't show it as rolled over. So the conversation at that point is send us a copy of your 1040 showing that it's a rollover, and then we remove it from the calculation. The reduction in salary, job loss, those are our biggest appeals that we receive. And prior to the pandemic, we would do about 50 or 60 appeals, financial appeals a year. At the peak, we had in 2021, 350 plus appeals came in over the course of the year. So that's kind of why it was taking us 4 to 6 weeks to get things done.
Yeah.
And the increases of income, we've seen some families, drawing from a pension, drawing from an IRA because of a job loss. And we kind of will request the documentation, speak with the parent, speak with the student, and kind of take it from there. Most of the time with those sort of incomes, if it was because of a loss of a job and they're drawing from a pension account or a 401k, we'll just kind of change where that funding is on the FAFSA. We'll take it out of an income and put it into a cash asset, which kind of helps adjust, because they did receive those funds, but they were utilizing it for living, not just for vacations or anything such as that. So we kind of reposition it on the FAFSA. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it does help lower the EFC to the point where we might be able to get some of the need-based aid back into the award.
Excellent, thank you. Okay. So here we have the criteria listed for a student to be considered independent, meaning they don't have to list parents on their FAFSA form. So you'll get copies of these slides, so you'll have this, but basically there's questions on the FAFSA form that asks these questions, and if the student answers yes to any of them, they're automatically considered independent. So let's go through dependency overrides. So students who might not be listed in one of those categories, let's talk about how they can address that with the school. So Carrie, do you want to go first in talking about these?
Sure. So I do want to just point out on the prior slide, it was listed specifically that this is federally independent students. And I do just want to put out there for the guidance counselors that there are circumstances in which a student may be federally independent, but if an institution also requires the CSS profile, they may not consider the student independent for institutional aid dollars. So for example, if a student is in a legal guardianship, but that legal guardian is a grandparent or maybe an aunt or someone like that, institutions that use the CSS profile may still require the information of that legal guardian and use their income in determining financial aid eligibility, again, for institutional dollars. Same thing with married students. If a student gets married during their time at Wellesley College, for example, if they were admitted as a dependent student, they graduate as a dependent student, even if their circumstances change while they are enrolled for our institutional dollars. They may become federally independent, but we'll keep them institutionally dependent. So I just wanted to put that out as an FYI in case there's a discrepancy in application materials.
Thank you for clarifying that. So now that we've addressed that, which is really good to make that differentiation with the profile, because colleges have their own policies and they can ask whatever questions they want on that profile. So it can be different. And one other point came to mind, some medical schools, obviously a student is a graduate student, they might want information about mom and dad's income, even for someone who's over 24. So it just depends, but for the most part, those for federal purposes. So Carrie, do you want to continue here and talking about overrides and what you may consider or what you commonly hear about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as Stephanie mentioned, there are the qualifications for students who automatically are independent, but there are circumstances that we all recognize in the financial aid community for students who may not be able to check off one of those independent boxes, but have a need to be considered independent. And those are circumstances where we consider a dependency override. So you'll see on the slide, if a parent says, I'm not giving my information, your financial aid won't be based on me, that's a willingness issue. That is not an inability to provide that information. So those are not circumstances that would qualify for a dependency override. The second bullet, parents who don't claim the student as a tax dependent. Currently, that is absolutely the case for, they would not be considered a dependency override. There are some things coming down the pike from the federal government about who counts as a parent that may be changing based on who claims them on a tax return. So that is coming down the road, and there'll be plenty more information, I'm sure, provided by MEFA and other organizations about those changes. But things that we do hear about, we hear about abuse, we hear about neglect, we hear about abandonment. One type of abandonment could be incarceration or institutionalization of parents. So there are circumstances in which students, they need to let us know about these special circumstances. Again, writing a letter, writing an email, if they're filling out the CSS profile, including some of this in the CSS profile for consideration. We don't have very many of these at Wellesley. I think we've had in the last couple of years, I mean, probably over the last 3 years, we've had 20 students ask us to consider a dependency override. So we don't have very many of these. I don't know if Kellen, I just put your names together, Kevin or Suellen might have more experience and more examples that they could provide.
Great, Suellen, do you want to take
Sure.
that? And anything counselors can do for students who may qualify.
Okay. So all first-year students coming in who we get their FAFSA and they're identified as independent, they're automatically selected for, we institutionally verify their dependency. So we need to see if they say they're in legal guardianship, we need to see a copy of that court documentation. So we see that. We also sometimes see a student who doesn't necessarily fit all the criteria, but they're working with their guidance office because the guidance has identified that they have a potential for homelessness or there is an abusive situation. And at that point, we do submit we have a form, we'll submit it to the guidance office. It'll tell them what we need, what kind of third-party documentation. We'll also need some kind of explanation of how the student is living. Are they supporting themselves? Do they have their own health insurance, or are they on their parents' health insurance? So we do actually ask for a statement on how they're living. So we've had some guidance counselors actually contact representatives from services so that the student can get on the Mass State health insurance before they come to Assumption. The student can get some SNAP benefits. So sometimes it's really important to see that the guidance counselors are really supporting them, and they've called directly from their office with the student right there to talk to us. We typically see anywhere in a given year for our returning student population, maybe 5 students who inquire about a dependency override. The biggest thing we see is that faculty and even our dean of students, they think that it's very easy. They think that if a student says my parent doesn't want to complete the FAFSA or doesn't want to contribute to my education, we can immediately flip a switch, and that's not the case. So we do get students sent to us from other departments who seem disappointed when they realize that it's a process and we need a lot more documentation than they have. And we recently just had a student who a new FAFSA came in, she was independent, and she provided a copy of a birth certificate. She had indeed over the summer had a baby of herself, so she now had a dependent. But when the counselor talked to her, she's commuting from home, she's on her parents' health insurance, she's getting her support from her parent to pay for college, and the decision was made to keep her as a dependent student. And she also realized she was getting a lot of federal and state aid anyhow. The only difference in aid would have been additional federal loans, which she really didn't want at that point.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. Kevin.
So at Salem State, part of my title of special programs and compliance is our housing insecure and independent student population has blown up in the past 3 or 4 years. we've always had a handful of students, but currently we have about 80 actively enrolled and attending students that fall under these special populations. Typically, they're DCF foster students, housing insecure, and Salem State also belongs to 2 housing insecure pilot programs, one through the state and one through HUD, where we have a number of beds for students that their housing is being paid by outside sources. Typically, the students come to us through our one-stop where they'll call and say, I can't fill out the FAFSA, I don't have my parents' information, I haven't been in contact with my parents. We do have a form that they then fill out that comes directly to me and myself and one of my colleagues. It used to just be me, but our numbers have grown so much that I needed to bring somebody else into this. We'll review the student statement, and if it's at risk of homelessness or any sort of housing insecure, my colleague or myself will contact the student and we'll do a thorough interview with the student to really determine what their status is. If a student's just seeking a dependency override based on their living situation at home or there are issues at home, in those cases, we do require the student write us a full statement outlining, what the situation is. We do request 2 to 3 other letters, at least one being from a disinterested third party. So a physician, a guidance counselor, clergy, anyone that's not directly involved with the student but knows of the student's situation. And then myself and my colleague will kind of review those. We also at Salem State have a student advocacy office where that's on the student life side, where they just kind of general help to students navigating the university. And we do get some referrals from them, and we work very closely with them. We actually have weekly case management meetings with our student life partners. And if the student comes directly from them, we can kind of relax some of the requirements like the interview, but we still do want to meet with the student and interview them just so that they know who we are and so that they know they have another resource on campus. But like I said, we have a large number. The number's grown over the years. And some students, we do get well, I support myself. And unfortunately, as my colleague said, there's really nothing we can do beyond that. And much like I believe Carrie said, any FAFSAs that come in as independent and they've listed guardianship, we do verify the information on that. So we will reach out to the students and request either court documents. We work very closely with DCF, with the education coordinator for the Northeast region. We have bi-monthly meetings with her, and we kind of go over her caseload, and she brings in the individual students' case managers if we need to. So we've really developed a really solid program for our at-risk students and our students that, through no fault of their own, can't go home or have no home to go to.
All right, great, thank you. And I wanted to make a note, we're in the process of scheduling a webinar with DCF, which we do every year or so. Hopefully it'll be the first week of December. I'm finalizing that date now, but keep an eye on your email for that because that's always a good one. And even if you want to just register and get the recording, it's a good idea to understand what DCF is doing as well. So I think we pretty much kind of covered a lot of this about what type of information you guys are looking for. If there's anything I missed here on this slide, let me know, but I think we pretty much covered that. Okay. All right, let's talk about undocumented students. This is where we get a lot of questions at MEFA about undocumented students, how it works in the admissions process, financial aid. Are they treated like international students? And then there's the DACA component. So we're gonna dig into this. But we do recommend that students who are in this situation look at each college's website that they're looking at and find out a little bit more about that school's institutional aid opportunities. Because for undocumented students, that's probably where they're going to get more financial aid, since they might probably not eligible for federal and state assistance. And they might be able to get merit aid, even if they're not able to get need-based aid. There's also private scholarships. There's a link here, a federal resource guide. It's from 2015. So it's old, but it's still on the federal department website and has a lot of good resources. So we did put the hyperlink in here. So you just have to put this in slideshow, put this here. I'll just show you real quick. Let's see if it even pops up. Now it's going to freeze my computer. All right, there we go. Okay, let's see. I probably shouldn't have clicked on that link. When I clicked on it during our practice session the other day, this did not happen. Okay, let's see here. Oopsie, here we go. So here's our link to the document. So this is what it looks like. So you can go on the Federal Department of Education website. And as I mentioned, it is from 2015, and it's a very long document, but it has a lot of good resources on there. Okay, so let's talk about, we have a few slides on undocumented students, so I'm definitely going to have our panel discuss this. But we wanted to just define what considers a student to be a DACA student. So here's the criteria here. I won't read every bullet, but they do need to have been younger than 31 as of June 15, 2012, have come to the US prior to turning 16, no felonies or misdemeanors, continuously lived in the United States since June 15th, 2007. Now here in Massachusetts, these students are eligible for in-state tuition and the Adams Scholarship. So that might be helpful, particularly at a public college. They can maybe get the in-state tuition, get the Adams Scholarship. So that can help defray some of the cost. But that's what a DACA student is. That's what's considered to be a DACA student. So let's talk about each school and what resources might be available for students, how you might look at undocumented students versus international, or maybe you look at them the same. So I'm going to start with Suellen. She's at the top of my screen, so I'll just start with Suellen. If you wanted to talk about how things work at Assumption for these students.
Sure. At Assumption University, we do treat the DACA students just like an international student. So we are a FAFSA only school, so they're not eligible to complete the FAFSA. Sometimes they will complete the FAFSA and it will come to us rejected, and we'll ask for information, and that's when they might disclose that they are an undocumented student, or other students are very upfront to us and want to know what we can offer them as someone who isn't eligible for the FAFSA. So they are eligible for merit aid, and we have different sources of merit aid besides the academic merit scholarship that they hear about in their acceptance letter that is evaluated and awarded by our admissions department. They could get an additional $2,500 if they attended a Catholic high school. They could get athletic aid. We have a lot of music scholarships, both vocal, band, and organ. And we also have additional merit aid for students who are enrolling in one of our dual degree programs, which leads to a master's degree, a bachelor's and master's combined. So the student could get numerous sources of merit aid, but they're not eligible for institutional need-based aid or federal or state aid.
Okay, great. And Carrie, how do you work with these students on your campus?
Sure. So at Wellesley, international students and undocumented students are treated the same way. We are need blind for US citizens and permanent residents in our admission policies. We are need aware for our international students. So for undocumented students, we are need aware. We do recognize the level of funding that they need as part of our evaluation of their admissibility. But we do meet 100% of their calculated need, just like we do for all of our other students. So an undocumented student who applies to and is accepted to Wellesley typically gets a very significant amount of financial aid dollars. They're all institutional dollars. As Suellen said, they're not eligible for federal aid. But we find that this population is a very high need population on our campus. In addition to kind of our admission and financial aid programs, we do have some organizations on campus. We have an Office of Student Success, which is tasked with kind of tracking first generation and also low income students, and our our undocumented and DACA students almost always fall into one of those two categories. So we have an office on campus who is available to those students for support. And we work really closely with them here in the financial aid office. So does career education and a number of other, the registrar's office, other offices on campus, so that they know who to point their students to when they need support if they're not able to directly support them.
That's great. That's great. Kevin, what resources are available, and how, are there other departments or clubs or things that students can get in touch with or find additional merit scholarships, things like that?
Sure. So unfortunately, Salem State, we do not have a significant amount of funding for our DACA students. We do have one small grant fund called the Opportunity Grant, which a student would apply for through our Salem State Academic Works website, which is our private and donor scholarship application site. Students that are eligible to receive the Abigail Adams tuition waiver, we do require them to complete a FAFSA. So yes, the FAFSA will come into us rejected, but we need the FAFSA on record in order to give them the tuition waiver. We also, any students that self-identify to us, we will refer to our student advocacy office, because they do have some outside resources that the student can reach out to if they need assistance with housing costs, or clothing or books or anything along that line. And we do have a small emergency grant fund. Well, it's a significant emergency grant fund, but they're smaller grants where a DACA student could apply, and because they are donor, that fund is donor funded, they would be eligible for some of those funds. And those are mini grants. They're between $250 and up to like $750. So we don't offer any of the institutional aid, and naturally not any of the state or federal aid to our DACA students, but we do have some support for them on campus, and we do have additional resources that they can access. But with our DACA students, it's all about them self-identifying to us. Otherwise, we don't really, we have information on our website, but we don't really have any means to go out and seek them.
Yep. Great. And Carrie, you may have mentioned this and it went over my head, but do you have these families and students fill out the profile, even though they can't fill out the FAFSA?
We do. So we require the CSS profile from all of our applicants, U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and our international students. We also recognize that there is a prohibitive cost associated with the CSS profile for international students and undocumented students. So we do, as an institution, we purchase fee payment codes. And if a student indicates to an applicant indicates to us that filling out the CSS profile would be a financial burden, we give them a code to fill it out and send it to us for free.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. And I do want to reiterate that if anybody has questions, feel free to type those in or save them till the end.
Absolutely.
So we have a bunch of resources here that you can peruse at your own leisure, because as we've heard, there's not a lot of resources at most schools. Most schools aren't like Wellesley. They might not have the endowment to be able to meet full need. And a lot of public schools also, they may just not have the the budgetary requirements to be able to help these students. So there are scholarships out there, though, for students in this situation. And there are coalitions and organizations that are knee-deep in helping these students. So we definitely recommend, checking out these blogs that we have, videos. We also have links to some private scholarship resources that we know of that are reputable. And I definitely recommend that you check this out when you get the PowerPoint, and research some of these opportunities so that you can help your students as well. Okay, so let's talk. Let's move issues to a new topic about non-traditional parents, non-traditional families, and how that might work at your school. Who's filling out the forms, all that good stuff. And maybe even focus a little bit, I know we mentioned it earlier, a little bit about willingness to provide information, particularly in divorce situations. I hear a lot of, well, the non-custodial parent is refusing to fill out the non-custodial profile, or, my parents don't want to fill out the FAFSA, and willingness is not always the same as unable to do it. So anything you want to provide here, Suellen, I'll start with you. Feel free to, jump
Sure.
in.
On the on the FAFSA, the student has to identify their household, and their household would be primarily their custodial parent or the parent who pays 60% of their support. And then it would include anyone that parent is supporting and the spouse of that parent. So that would mean married parents who are living together, unmarried parents living together, or if the biological parents are divorced or separated, it would be that custodial parent, the parent who pays over 60% of support, and their current spouse. And that's the one that we do sometimes get some calls and pushback, is when a FAFSA will come to us and it will be rejected because of filing status, or it'll have a code, or the student wrote about in their essay for admissions about how important their step parent was in their life, but then they're not on the FAFSA. So these things sometimes come up, and we do have parents question, why am I having my spouse who put their own children through college years ago, why do I have to submit their information? But unfortunately they do. So we do have to collect information from both parents, even if it's a step parent.
Great, thank you. Kevin, do you have anything to add here?
When it comes for separations, that gets a little bit muddy, because we need to, if they haven't filed a legal separation and the couple have just separated, it's kind of hard to prove that. So basically what we request is we ask for a utility bill in that, like a serious utility, not just cable, not a cell phone bill. We're talking gas, electric, anything like that, in the parent's name that no longer lives with the custodial parent. So if there is no legal separation documents, we do require some sort of proof that that parent is separated from their spouse. And typically that does come down to a utility bill at a different address in that separated parent's name. But pretty much what else Suellen had said, we kind of just have to take what we see on the FAFSA, and if you're reporting married, but there's only one parent income on it, even if it's a step parent, we hear often, well, they didn't adopt my children. It really doesn't matter. They're in the household. We do need their tax information.
Yeah, that's great. And then Carrie, can you talk a little bit about specifically the profile and then custodial form and how that would work?
Yeah, so Suellen and Kevin covered what we need on the FAFSA. The CSS profile asks for information on all of the students' biological, legal, etc. parents. So it will ask the student for up to 4 parents, and it will ask, the CSS profile will say list the parent, their name, their age, and what their relationship to you is. So we will see mother, stepfather, and then we will see father, stepmother in some cases where we have 4 parents. The expectation is that the student's biological and or adoptive parents are the parents that are providing for their college education from the CSS profiles perspective. So what that means is situations where we're requiring tax information from a non-custodial parent, we're requiring a CSS profile from a non-custodial parent, and potentially their spouse. And there are, we recognize that there are situations in which students are unable to obtain information from that non-custodial parent. Again, it goes back to some of those same things we talked about for the dependency override: abuse, neglect, long-term abandonment. I haven't seen this person since I was 6 months old, and I have no idea how to get in touch with them. So we recognize that there are circumstances in which students are unable to provide that information. They will note that on the CSS profile. There are very, very specific and clear instructions about listing parents and listing their contact information. And that if you have no contact, if you have been the victim of abuse, If your parent is incarcerated, there are specific categories that the students can select, and those will cause the CSS profile to not ask for the non-custodial information. Now, some institutions will take that and move forward and will not ask for any additional non-custodial information. Other institutions will not just take the word of the CSS profile. So a student may indicate that they have no contact with their non-custodial parent. The CSS profile will recognize that there is no household B information to collect. We'll send that information to an institution. The institution may very well turn around and say, okay, but I need you to fill out this non-custodial parent waiver petition. It's a 2-page form that the College Board has issued. Most institutions that are collecting non-custodial information will take the College Board's form. There are a couple of schools out there that won't. They have their own institutional form, but it'll ask for information about who is this person, what are their whereabouts, when was the last time you had contact, what was the nature of that contact. It will also ask for a personal statement from the student, and in most cases will ask for third-party documentation, much like the dependency override process. So as a guidance counselor, students may come to you and ask you to write letters about the fact that this person has never been involved in this student's educational experience, that they're not listed on school records, that from your perspective and the conversations that you've had with the student, what you know about their relationship or lack thereof with that individual. So it can be, and again, it really depends on the institution. Some institutions take what we get from the profile, and other institutions require a couple of additional steps.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's great information.
Can I just add one little piece?
Yeah.
Because the FAFSA is using income from 2 years, it's using tax information from 2 years ago. If the separation occurred 1 year ago, we strongly recommend do not take it upon yourself to remove the spouse's income from the FAFSA when you're filling it out, because it raises flags, it flags the FAFSA, then we require a lot more documentation. So if, we're using right now, 21's tax returns, you got separated in 22 and you're filling out 23's FAFSA, use all the tax information. You filed married, filing joint, that's what you're going to put on the FAFSA. Don't take it upon yourself to remove your spouse's income from the FAFSA. Allow us to do that. It's just cleaner, it's just easier, and it really helps prevent any delays in financial aid processing.
Okay, so they should reach out to you as a special circumstance.
Definitely.
Excellent. That's really good tip. Thank you. Okay, so I know we're closing in on the 1 hour mark, so we have a few more things that we just want to mention. Sudden changes in assets, household expenses, things like that. So sudden changes in assets, where people need to, they might get an insurance payout to pay for a roof collapse or something like that. What sort of things do you guys consider? And we can make this part really quick. And if you have anything to add, let us know about, when families are using their savings to pay for some of these, if you would consider that.
We don't really, at Assumption, we don't really consider this. We would only consider the medical expenses if they put that on their taxes. And to be on their taxes, I believe it has to be 7.5% of their adjusted gross income.
Excellent.
Thank you. How about you, Kevin?
It doesn't come up often. It comes up rarely, actually, but you needed a house because you needed a new roof because of storm damage, so you withdrew from your 401k. We would actually ask you for receipts to indicate or prove that what you withdrew is what you spent for the house repair, and then we would remove that from the calculation.
Excellent. And Carrie, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, similar. I mean, the medical expenses we'll consider, again, if they report them on the CSS profile and or their tax return. Home repairs, typically we're seeing insurance payouts. So it's not necessarily a reduction in assets, because there is also, we won't call it income, but there's money coming in that would pay for those expenses in many cases. So we don't see a lot of it, but again, with any special circumstance, we would encourage students and families just to write to us and tell us about it, because if it is something that we can consider, we will, but we won't know about it unless you tell us.
Great. And how about, Carrie, I'll start with you here. Do you consider any of these expenses as part of a special circumstance that might help, any of these expenses that families are paying that might help, reduce their income on
We
the
absolutely,
financial aid formula?
yeah, we absolutely do. So at Wellesley, we consider private elementary and secondary school tuition that's being paid for younger siblings. We use that as part of our analysis when we're determining a family's ability to pay. So if you're paying tuition for private high school, that impacts your ability to pay tuition for college. So we take that into consideration. Medical, dental, and vision payments that are not covered by insurance out of pocket. Again, we're looking at, I think as Kevin said a few minutes ago, maybe Suellen, sorry, the year in which we're looking for the 23-24 academic year, we're looking at base year 2021. So we are looking at the expenses in that same year. That's the year's income we're looking at, and that's the year's expenses we're looking at. So if there were medical, dental, and vision bills paid out of pocket in 2021, we would ask for that on the application. Additionally, we don't account for student loan payments made by the student or made by a parent on behalf of the student, but we do sometimes consider parents who are making payments on their own student loans. So maybe their grad school loans. Again, that is on a case-by-case basis. And I will say has been a bit of a pain point for us as of late, because families who have been making payments on these loans for years suddenly didn't have to make payments on those loans because of the pause that was made on student loan repayment. So we're suddenly in a situation where we've been giving families historically an allowance against their income for these payments that they were making. They're not making those payments anymore, so we're not giving them those allowances anymore. And it has caused some of our families to see an increase in the expected family contribution, because an unexpected increase from their perspective, because they don't feel that anything has changed in their financial circumstances, but on paper, they're not making those payments that they were previously making.
Exactly. That's great. How about you, Suellen, at Assumption?
Sure. We would consider all these for the basis of an appeal. So we definitely hear from a lot of parents who, because we are a Catholic school, will say that they value a Catholic education and that they have younger siblings that they are paying for private Catholic school. And we actually consider this a basis for an appeal. So we would tell them to go to the appeal link to put this down. We're not necessarily collecting documentation. In most cases, we can see that the student has the specific merit award they get from going to a Catholic high school. So we typically won't ask for a specific documentation for that, but we would consider that as the basis for the appeal.
Great, thank you. And Kevin, anything else to add here?
We typically only see requests for appeals based on medical and dental payments. The thing with that is the FAFSA does actually put aside some income protection. So, and I'm blanking on the percentage, but your out-of-pocket medical expenses would need to be, 7% or 11% above what the FAFSA has already protected as assets and income. So those don't get approved all that often.
Okay, great, good to know. All right. And I know we're at the 3 o'clock hour, so we have a couple more slides. So I'll just maybe have each of you real quick, if you have something new to talk about here. Changes in household size that you may consider, or how you would want families to handle that if it's a new scenario, such as having a new baby after they file the FAFSA. Kevin, do you want to go first with this one?
We would consider all 5 of those as long as the student or parent can document it.
Excellent. And Carrie, do you have anything else to add here? No, same. Okay, Suellen, how about
It's
you?
pretty much the same. We would consider all of that. We would get a documentation or statement. We'd get a dependent verification worksheet typically where they would fill out their household information and have it signed by the parent and student. And then the only like new baby or divorce separation, we would collect documentation from that.
Great, thank you. Okay, and so since I was just chatting with you, are there any of these cost of attendance adjustments that you typically hear about or make so that students can increase their cost of attendance, potentially increase the financial
Sure.
aid they're receiving?
We definitely hear from our graduate school population about this because we have some graduate students who could be eligible for the the unsubsidized loan for up to $20,500, but they might be getting a tuition voucher because they're a research assistant at Assumption, and they want to basically increase their cost of attendance. And sometimes we will get rental bills to show what they're actually paying for their housing so we can increase this. We have increased it for travel for international students. And then we do have a nursing program that has additional costs. Our science classes have additional lab fees with them. So when I'm ever at a point where I have to reduce aid because a student is over cost, I can detail into their budget and I can see if they're being charged a lab fee. I can see if they're being charged a practicum fee, and then I can raise the budget for that.
Excellent, thank you. Carrie, do you have anything to add here on this one?
Sure.
That you
So
usually hear about?
yeah, so again, because Wellesley meets 100% of students' calculated need, these are all kind of appealable circumstances. Well, the first 5 are appealable circumstances for us. We will consider increasing the cost of attendance for, if a student says that their books cost more than what was in the budget, we can increase their budget. We can add a budget item for a computer. We include transportation, it's an estimate of 2 round trips to campus during the academic year, start of fall, end of fall, start of spring, end of spring, if they can document that their airfare costs more than that. But for Wellesley, those are all increases in the cost of attendance to allow for subsidized loan borrowing. So we don't meet we already have such a generous financial aid policy that we don't increase grant aid for all of these things. But again, because we package limited need-based loans in our awards, if any loans at all for some students, this gives us the ability to increase their cost in a way that allows them to borrow those subsidized loans. And we don't have any grad programs, we don't have any specialty, nursing or teaching programs or anything like that. So the last bullet point doesn't really apply at our institution.
Okay, great. Kevin, anything to add here?
Much what Suellen said, we see it primarily with our grad students because instead of paying rent with, a couple roommates, they actually have a mortgage. So we do adjust, but it's primarily with our graduate students.
Excellent, great. And this is nearing the end here. So these are things that colleges typically do not consider an appeal. So discretionary credit card debt, we talked about the student loan payments, weddings, funerals. I know Karensa, Carrie, when we were talking about this beforehand, you mentioned that sometimes funerals, if you want to just mention that real quick, I thought that was an interesting story of where you may actually consider it.
Yeah, sure. So we have had instances in the past where we've seen that families, we know how extravagant weddings can be, how expensive they can be, and sometimes families make choices to spend a significant amount of money on weddings. But we have seen some appeals come through recently where families have spent a significant amount of money on funerals. There may be multi-day funeral, celebrations of life. It may involve a significant amount of travel to a foreign country for the entire family to be present. So we've seen some of these come through. We don't necessarily make allowances for it, but it was just something that when I saw weddings on here, I thought it was an interesting addition to potentially say that, this is a way that some families have made choices about spending money that doesn't necessarily impact their calculated ability to pay for college.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Kevin, do you have anything to add here on this one?
No,
Or Suellen?
those would not be considered at this point.
Okay. Suellen, and any that you would consider or have? No.
We really don't consider these. I mean, we've heard vet bills that has come up, and it's very sad, but it's not something we consider.
Having just been through an abdominal surgery with my dog, I can see where the cost can add up. Thankfully, I have pet insurance.
Right.
All right, great. Well, we are at a little over the hour, so I'm going to just kind of wrap it up here. But we encourage families to have conversations with the financial aid office about any of these issues. And if you can guide the family to do that and encourage them, we definitely recommend that. If there's gaps, most schools don't meet full need. So that's what we encourage the students for the school of their choice, their top choice school, to maybe talk to the financial aid office to see, well, is there something that you didn't mention that might be considered? Because we just talked about a lot of things that could be considered. We do want everybody to know that you got an hour, 1 PDP point here under the MEFA Institute. Please visit MEFA.org, the school counselor page. We've revamped that. We have so many resources that you can copy and paste onto your website that families can access, literally online booklets about admissions, about financial aid, about saving for college, links to events such as webinars, things like that. So definitely take advantage of that, and take advantage of our MEFA Institute PDPs so that you can use those for your credentialing as well. You'll get a copy of these slides as well as a link to the recording. Encourage you to follow us on social and connect with us that way. And I am going to open up for questions if we have any questions. We haven't gotten any yet. We've done such a good job of talking about this. But if you have any, type them in right now and give us a call. Our phone number's here, our email's here. I get calls from school counselors all the time that might have a student in their office and they're helping them fill out the FAFSA and they have a question about a line item, or it could be a number of different things, how they want to handle a unique circumstance, and we give them advice on what to do. So feel free to definitely take advantage of that. Okay, I do not see any questions coming in the door, so I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the webinar and end the webinar for everybody. But I want to thank our esteemed panel for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. It's very interesting. I learned a few new things today myself. So thank you, Kevin, Suellen, and Carrie for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.